Hello, welcome to season 5 of Hot Pot Talks. My name is Jen Sunshine, here with my dear friend and longtime creative partner, David Ng, as well as our special guests, Namande and Danielle. David and I are the co artistic directors of Love Intersections, a media arts collective based in Vancouver, Canada, that produces intersectional and intergenerational film and artwork from underrepresented communities of color. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that Hot Pot Talks is organized from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. As uninvited guests, we recognize and extend our gratitude to the stewards of this land who have been protecting it since time immemorial. Part of our work as activists and queer artists on unceded territories means working in solidarity with ongoing Indigenous struggles for sovereignty, decolonization, reparations, and land back.
For season 5, we are excited to be collaborating with a new co host. Namande Mkhalisa is a longtime collaborator of Love Intersections. Namande is a fat black feminist in love with stories. She is fascinated by the ways people's lived realities shape their joys and pains and believes that there is healing to be found in the stories we choose to tell and salvation, perhaps, in who we choose to tell them to. Radical softness is her weapon of choice in a world that often casts her as a hard, fat, black obstacle. Food, hunger, sex, access, and desirability are her favorite topics. She is a feminist scholar. Fat activism, sustainability, climate resilience, and food security are her passions. Hi, Namande. And now, introducing our special guest for today's episode, Danielle Gallardo. They, them is a non-binary mestizo drag educator from Mexico and a UBC public scholar whose doctoral research supports educators recognizing the relationships between sexuality, gender, racialization, and settler colonialism. For the past 15 years, Danielle has worked in educational leadership and curriculum with a passion and commitment to decolonization, social justice, and Indigenous resurgence. They collaborate with community organizations to develop curricular practices that positively affect the well being of those who regularly experience gender based violence. Their research focus contributes to the emerging field of Indigenous informed gender and sexuality scholarship as it proposes to interrogate and dismantle patriarchal and colonial assumptions of heterosexism and binaries through decolonial Soji education and drag pedagogy. Danielle also gives life to Gaia Lacandona, a drag mutant, looking to end the monarchy of queens and kings and embrace a community of monsters, creatures, and things. Through the art of drag, Gaia cultivates a place where two spirit, trans, and queer youth can imagine otherwise. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you. Hola.
Maybe Danielle, maybe we can just kick off with tell us a little bit more about Gaia.
Oh, I love that. My weapon of choice, Namande.
Yes.
I live for your. That bio is everything. Gaia Lacandona was is my drag persona, but it was not necessarily my first exposure to drag. I started doing drag about 18, 20 years ago, and it was a moment where I wanted to also was thinking about transitioning and thinking about, but it was a whole nother, era in Mexico. And my drag name at that time was Ayla Dache, and it comes from I like that shit, you know, Ayla Dache. It makes sense at that time. Right? And she comes and goes sometimes, she'll appear here. She's more bougie, very telenovela diva,
Yes.
the villain. So she
Yeah.
comes and goes. But no, I had like I could never be a trans educator inside schools in the 2000s.
Mm,
So it was a moment where I had to choose whether being an educator or like appearing in a more masculine way would benefit my livelihood, the way that I was moving in the world, my security. Um, so it took a while into being an educator and starting to think about indigenous resurgence, going to Zapatista communities in Mexico who are indigenous communities who have their own autonomy and governance to start thinking about the gender binary and how that has affected my whole identity and the way that um, machismo in Mexico and like kind of these heteropatriarchal structures were embedded within all of my relationships. And Gaia was born of that bringing this character who was a non-binary persona, which represents, many people call her Mother Earth, but I think it more of this Earth creation energy. And Lacandona was where those teachings came from. It's in the Selva Lacandona where the Zapatistas um, steward that territory. And they, in I think in 1994, they released La Declaración de la Selva Lacandona, which for them was this call for indigenous resurgence and autonomy. So, and something that was so related to place. And so my last name becomes that side of Lacandona in terms of my honor to that place, to that land, and to the way that I move now as a drag educator.
Beautiful. I'm I'm so intrigued by how your personas evolved and
Mm,
transformed. And I particularly have a fondness for the mutation aspect
mm,
of Gaia's transformation. Um, and I've always, I think growing up, I've always been, um, you know, compelled by monsters and mutants and freaks and weirdos. And I think there's a lot of parallels, quite explicitly, within the queer community, you know, um, because of the history of ostracization, but also a kind of reclaiming. So I'm curious about the mutation that Danielle himself experienced, um,
mm,
versus the persona of Gaia. And yeah, I just want to hear more about your upbringing, about how
Mm.
you've evolved, how you've transformed. Yeah.
mm. It's a great question. That transformation. And I love that side of mutation. I've always related as well with, all the um freaks and
Yeah.
weirdos
Yeah.
and like people, a lot of times the villains,
Yeah.
honestly,
Yeah.
the ones who had like those like more power and had to, recluse and hide themselves. And so it's a big, I think, storyline for us queers.
Yeah.
um but I came from, it's my upbringing is quite interesting because I come from two very authoritarian and like backgrounds. For my mother's side of the family, which is like settler ancestry, Arab and French, they are more like um, leaning towards whiteness, obviously, and that settler understandings of self, and have always brought this hierarchical side to who I am, always diminishing my other side of the family, for example. And they come from a police background, actually. So my grandfather was a part of the police and narcotics, interestingly. But there's also these layers of corruption within, being part of the Mexican police. And from my other side of the family, which is the indigenous side, my grandfather, who's a Puripecha, he is comes from the military. So, I grew up with military and police. And
Wow.
it was very different with the military side of the family because although they were, in their own very restrictive understanding of nationalist agendas, they still were very connected to land because they were campesinos. They have been brought up with cultivating. So the connection that they had with land was still very powerful. And I was born with these two families, and my parents had me when they were 16. Um, so it was very difficult to for them to like um, raise me, and so I ended up being raised by my grandparents for the most part. And I grew up with these two like very different, like walking in two worlds. For one was, and I could see it reflected that, for example, in the Mexican soap operas and the telenovelas. No, you had like this, like the more rich white family, and then you have like the poor brown one, and it always happened. And then you would, so a lot of that side of me growing up, it was imitating those ideals and that I saw in television. And for example, although I had a beautiful childhood in with well, it had its thing, but with my grandmother specifically, because we were so connected. She taught me how to cook. She told me how to grow corn. She told me how to be in the milpas. She told me how to, from the earth to the table, and everything that I wanted to be a cook, and at some point, but it was because of those teachings. And after that, growing up in these two worlds, obviously the me not being able to present as a femme kid, although everybody knew, everybody knew, because they would tell me, the way that my auntie would go like, there's a way that you go down the stairs and you like touch the rail down, you know and and it's like, you've done that since you were like 5 years old, and it's like you've always been a diva. So when people have asked me like, what's your gender, there was always this sense of, I'm a diva. That's what I've always been. And regardless of all those, there's always this like energy, very, share, um, and that obviously was celebrated for a few years. That it's, I think, very interesting in queerness, that for that expression is very celebrated until certain age, and then it was very controlled after that. Like, you cannot walk that way, you cannot move that way, you cannot you cannot wear capes anymore. I was obsessed with capes, um, and that really controlled my identity and started to, what I think is this now, like, straight drag. I started to have to put on another persona, which is a whole other story of me trying to understand um, my identity within the limitations of society and school in Mexico. And it was very tough, in being able to conceal who you are and be that kid in the closet, or in my, I think for me it was, and I've read this in other places, like, we didn't even have a closet, but it was hiding somewhere. we, because we just had like doors, mama. Like, I couldn't hide there. But I would do all my lip syncs and all those things while washing the clothes. So my mom would be like, "Go wash the clothes outside," and while washing the clothes and putting the clothes in the hangers in the, like, outside, I would do my lip syncs. And then one time, my mom, I remember perfect. I was 14, and I was in this deep. I lived for Whitney Houston, and I was like in this deep, I have nothing Whitney Houston lip sync. And she comes in through the sheets, and I'm like in the middle of it, and goes like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I I couldn't even answer. I was just completely red, and just like, I don't know. Yeah, I was just like listening to music.
Was there
And
a sense of
mhm.
shame in that moment, or in that moment, how you reacted? What was that? I'm always so curious about those imprints that we have in the social conditioning.
Mm.
I'm thinking specifically about institutions like religion, and even doubly so with your, you know, both sides of your family around like the police and military institutions, and how that conforms you and constricts and restricts you in a certain way. But in those moments of being quote unquote caught doing something that
Mm.
is so natural to you, that is you
Mm.
expressing your joy and just being yourself, how do
Mhm.
we
Mm.
know instinctively to react with any type of feeling? I'm curious about how you felt in that moment, or if you remember that.
Mm.
No, I totally. It's something that it was complete shame. It was like, oh, they caught me,
Mm.
again. And it wasn't again. It wasn't like, oh, they caught me finally. It was like, oh, it happened again. Because these flares of femininity have always appeared in the way that I moved.
Mm.
There was always this natural um, inclination towards, putting my arms
Yeah.
here or doing like certain poses,
Mm.
and they would be like, no, don't. So at that moment where I was like feeling this, like feeling my oats, feeling myself,
Yeah.
doing this like grandeur, just in my safe space, it felt like, oh no, it happened again. I have to, oh no, apologize for being who I was.
Mm.
Mm.
And I think it's so funny because my military grandfather, um, Virgilio, and he we used to love Mexican divas, love them, and he would like have a VHS cassette where he would tape performances of them. So when I was like growing up with them over there in Puebla, um, they like I would see those cassettes with him all the time, and he was obsessed with because my birth date is the same date of one of the biggest divas in Mexico, Maria Felix.
Mm.
And he would always remind me of that all the time. You were born on the date of Maria Felix. So I knew all these people, and they would be the ones like encourage me to do those like lip syncs. It's
Yeah.
something that I've done all my life, like singing, and I would have
Mm.
like my little microphone with my capes, and I would be singing like these biggest diva things. So it's something that people knew I already did. So it wasn't like my mom wasn't necessarily that shocked because it was like, oh, it's Daniel doing his acting things. In that time,
Mm.
his because I wanted to also act. I was a theater kid, like
Mm.
in the small community theater that we had, and that's where Gaia, not Gaia, but Ayla at that time, kind of this drag started, and me thinking about possibly becoming the first time that I, used foundation
Mm.
and could use like all my girlfriends would always tell me like, you curl your lashes, right? So it was the first when I started doing like I don't people. It's natural. These are completely natural, please. Um,
Baby, you was born that way,
Baby, she was born that way. But finally, I was like, oh my God, the extension that you get. Now I understand. Now look at them. So that's where I think the beginnings of me finding my own folks. I was surrounded by girls all the time,
Mm.
obviously. And yeah, just there it started to see like, oh, there's another possibility. So I love really came from a lot of them. I don't know if I can say that, but a lot of my hags, my fat hags, of course.
You're allowed.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
allowed. um, and yeah, that's where this big transformation started to be like, oh, you know I want to be a woman.
Mm.
Um, but then that just turned into a very dark period, in trying to for that to happen, and
Mm.
a lot of like losing a lot of folks, like trying to hide as well, and getting myself in really like difficult situations with people who wanted to or take advantage of me or
Mm.
just were completely violent. So I had
Oh.
a big altercation that just completely scared me
Mm.
and where I almost lost my like sight. And that just was like, no, I guess I don't like
Wow.
it's not worth putting my life at risk. And I had a lot of friends that also like things happened to them,
Mm.
and so I like just went back into like
Yeah.
completely under. And then I ended up moving to the States because work in Mexico wasn't possible. And I dropped my career as an educator and ended up being like working in hotels, um, undocumented as an alien. And I think that side of like this constant side of me perceived like what you were mentioning, like a mutant, like monstrous, like a deviant, like an alien. This
Mm-hmm.
has been a constant othering within kind of my life, this dehumanization that has constantly
Mm-hmm.
happened to my
Yeah.
identity.
Mm.
But there I found like all them queers who were also like leaving Mexico to find a place for them to be themselves. There were a lot of people in like the voguing scene and
Mm.
the ballroom scene, in Denver, Colorado. There was a lot of freaks and monsters and people doing drag that was really interesting as well. And that's where the first time I was like, well, fuck gender. Thank you very much. The non-binary was like something that was people were like starting to identify themselves as,
Mm.
and I was like, oh damn, this is actually yes,
Mm.
duh, this
Mm.
has always been me, the diva, the they thems, and that's where I started to think of myself in like being feminine while wearing a mustache. That for a lot of time, having like a beard during that side of transition was a big like gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
Mm.
And now it became more of a no, yeah, like it's who I am, and not certain parts of I understanding of that, like for some Western aesthetics and white aesthetics have always like
Mm.
completely determined what I see as beautiful, and how I wanted to appear as
Mm.
Mm.
those standardized things. And
Mm.
it really became such a reclamation of my body, myself, and I finally started to move with people and meet people that felt the same way.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you,
And then do
Danielle.
you sorry, David. You want
No,
to go?
no, go ahead. Go ahead. No, go
Oh,
ahead.
in terms of your family, have you reconnected over the years? Have you do they see who you are now? Do they accept? Have you made peace? Do you go home and visit
Mm.
and are loved and celebrated? Or are
Mm.
you still distant? How does that work?
So for I thought my mom, she had me when she was 16. So
Mm.
our relationship is very different. I think we're very um, I had to take a lot of like growing up really fast, a lot of responsibility. Like it was been like that weird relationship between mom
Yeah.
and
Mm.
child. So she knows perfectly, and she like supports it, and is like very open to it because she's always been like this like hippie woman who is
Mm.
like careless of life, and we love her, and but damn, my mom is a mess sometimes. Like, yeah, she knows.
I mean, I would imagine because she probably also experienced her own narrative and version of
Mhm.
alienation,
Absolutely.
subversion, you know.
Hmm, hmm.
Yeah.
And like my since getting like with the having an indigenous man be with her, it was
Yeah.
also like, why are you doing this,
Yeah.
and
Mm.
Mm. Mm.
she was also, as a teacher, she's the person who brought me down with zapatistas and like showed me those
Mm.
understandings,
Wow.
She was a kinder teacher and was always like, I think the reason why I didn't want to be a teacher, and at the end was like, I am. I
Yeah.
am an educator. I
It's in
live
your
for
blood.
this.
Yeah.
It's, yeah, it's completely like there's this like, and now I'm like, it gives me so much joy now. But
Yeah.
for like my grandparents weren't able to accept it. Like it was something that from my mom's side, it has been something that you just don't speak about it. My partner is my friend, so
Mm.
things like that.
Yeah.
But for my grandpa, from my side, mis abuelitos, from my father's side, it was kind of a different story because, oh damn, am I gonna say it? Okay, I'll tell you this story. So when I, before coming out of the closet and everything, there was this time, I went back to the town of my abuelitos,
Mhm.
and my abuelo goes like, um, I know what you like. And I'm like, what? What is, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Like the food?
This is
And he's
sorry.
like,
This
I
is your
know.
this is your grandpa.
My grandpa, my indigenous grandpa, the Purepecho.
Yeah, yeah.
And he goes like, I know what you like. And I'm like, okay, yeah, the food was good. I don't know what. And he's like, no, I've always known. And he's like, I see it in your eyes. And I'm like, just like thinking that it's that, but not necessarily knowing. And it's, what do you know? And he goes, don't worry, I'm a mayate. And I'm like, what? And a mayate is like a, oh God. It's like it's like a straight dude who like likes like femboys,
Yeah.
like has
Yeah.
the like
Ah,
likes
okay.
the dolls,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
enjoys the dolls. And I'm like, are you kidding me? This isn't. And I'm like, what? And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is like, it's normal. Like
yeah.
during when I was in the military, I was on my yate, and there was a lot of, the ones like you. I'm like, this is
Oh my God.
so it just like blew my mind, And
Yeah.
after that, slowly we started having conversations of like, okay, yeah, maybe I am.
Yeah.
And but for me to see like this
Yeah.
military dude who has always had like this, he like pictures in horses and something I could never do. Like I was always so scared. Um,
Mm.
and having like this, and I talked so much about the horses because it was like pictures all around my house
Yeah.
back home. And him saying that, just like, and I was like, also this, there was, but he then said, um always know that what you're, and it's I don't know if it's in the Bible or not, but he always said like, never let what your left right know what your right hand does, you
Yeah.
know
Mm. Right.
like always keep it separately.
Mm.
And obviously with this indication of don't tell your grandmother,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm confiding like with you because we are men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that some of you, like that, but at the end, you still have to have your family. You still have to have it.
Mm.
So for me, it was just like this, like very shock of, okay, so you
Wow.
just confessed. You like, okay, yes.
Wow.
And then years later, I was with my grandmother, my abuelita from my father's side as well, so
Uh-huh.
his wife, and she goes like, I know. And talking about my grandpa, my
Yeah.
Yeah.
abuelito.
Yeah. Of
And I was
course.
like, this like family drama, and I'm in the middle of it. I've always been in the middle of a family drama. They, for some reason, I was always the person also that everybody wanted to confide in.
Yeah.
So I knew everything.
Incredible. Incredible.
it's one of
I love
it's
that.
one of the queers. It's
Yeah.
being like, that person,
Yeah.
because we do have like this, I don't know, this sensibility, and there's this
Yeah.
Yes.
like,
Yes.
Yeah.
after they're like, no, you're actually like very necessary for the community. I'm like, you think so?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah,
You're
we
safe.
had that conversation exactly,
Yeah.
and she's like, I know, and I'm like, okay. So then I was like, okay, can I bring my partner one day? And she met Joe, and
Hmm.
Mm,
my grandma met my partner. And
That's
mm,
wonderful.
it was just first she met him as a friend,
Yes.
yeah.
just to taint the water. You had to check the waters, but she passed away last year. It was like mm, a very like rough time because she's the woman that raised me.
Yes.
But yeah, it was great. It was like I finally felt seen with for them,
Yeah.
because they finally could see all the what this became. Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Daniel, I don't what it's making me think about like and I don't know how if this lands on you this way, but like it when cuz I have it makes me think a lot about my family and the community, this very conservative Christian community that I grew up in. And when I came out and was very very publicly and politically vocal about being queer,
Mm.
and a lot of difficult conversations within families, and not quite as dramatic as the ones that you were sharing, but I would get emails from people in my congregation saying like, just saying, I have never heard someone, in my community even talk about being queer, and to even just open up that space to be able to. So I guess what I'm saying is like what I'm when you're sharing the stories, it also makes me think about what you're maybe opening up for your family in terms of 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 their identity and their journey. Um,
Totally.
yeah, and
And that's something even that started like not even with queerness, with like revolting in terms of I've always been a very big like decriminalized marijuana person who was
mm,
out there like legaliza la legalización. Like
Mm.
it's something that that's one of the reasons why I'm living here. Like I won't lie. Like I was in shock. It's something that my like ancestors, like I saw my great grandmother with her little pot plant doing like creams
Mm.
and have always known.
yeah.
So I've always been like that person who was like I'm the first grandchild of all my with all my cousins. So it has completely opened kind of
Mm,
that way of them being able to be um, more outside the limitations that we were giving within our family and those
mm,
constraints. So my cousins, I think they do see me as this like revolting kind of have always been like that
yeah.
Mm.
with all of the gender took me a little while, but any authoritarian thing I was always like nah, and I was finding ways to escape and like
Mm,
to
mm-hmm.
grow my own weed and to go with the zapatistas or to protest and to
Mm,
Yes.
because it was always like no, fuck the system.
yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It's so yeah, it opened a lot of ways for them to think about things
Yeah.
differently.
Mm. Mm.
Hmm.
On that, Danielle, I wanted to link something you said earlier around your interest in food and that you wanted to be a cook. And I've just, when we originally met, when we were filming Drag is for Everyone, you, I remember being really struck by what you were saying in terms of corn. I think it was corn, queerness, decolonization, and it's making me think about this sort of breaking out of sort of regimes, if you will.
Yes.
Yeah, can you tell me a little bit about? I think you were talking about how you're like theorizing about queerness, drag, and
Hmm.
corn.
Was this specifically
Yes, I
like
love that.
tricolor corn too?
Yes,
Yeah, look,
Yeah.
it's this one.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, 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 yeah.
If you
yes,
Yeah.
folks see
yeah.
it,
Oh,
it's
yes.
my on Monday. It's my multicolor corn.
Oh,
So I
lovely.
grew up like with that type of corn, and
Mm,
not only that one, but there were a lot of variants.
Mm.
Obviously, with so many different like textures and forms and sizes, and which continue to do now, and then focused a lot in like ancestral seeds cultivation in my work. but it all started because of her. Like she food was always like me and food are like, yes, please more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I I grew up with the most beautiful tortillas, which were the blue tortillas. I just there's just more hearty and like thicker. And
Okay.
my grandma would always do them. And they're blue because of the when you put everything together, it turns up into a more of
Mhm.
a black texture that ends up being like blue when you
Oh,
spread it.
lovely.
It's delicious,
Yes.
and for me they're the best. But then when I was 9 years old, my parents decided they wanted my mom specifically decided that she wanted to take care of me now that she had remarried and having a family. And so they were in Mexico City. So it was when I went back to live to Mexico City for a little while. It was always like ping pong with me, go back to Puebla, which is where my abuelitos were. So when I went to Mexico City, I was always looking for that blue tortillas. I was like, and where do we find those? Like I only see the white ones. Where
Mm.
do we get the blue ones? And my mom was like, no, you can only get that in the pueblos. You can only get that in the towns. Like it's
Mm.
not like nobody does them here because there's here it's maseca, which is like this um, humongous enterprise of transgenic corn.
Right.
And so I always was obsessed with that idea of like I want the blue tortilla. So when I went back with my grandma, it was something that I would always have. So I started to think in my own work, and I'm doing a children's book about that. It's like
Mm.
the different forms of cultivating corn.
Mm.
Um, but it started to see this relationship between growing up when I started being interested in through like Zapatista education, who had always a beautiful relationship with corn. They saw like our ancestors see corn as the giver of life, and from corn a lot of things happen. My grandpa would always tell me the story of how for humans to be able to sustain themselves in earth, Quetzalcoatl had to look for um, a red ant that was carrying corn and look for like turn this grandeur. Quetzalcoatl is this like um, feathered serpent,
Mm.
humongous, and then turned into an ant and follow the red ant to the Tonacatepet, which is the place of sustenance where all the milpas were, and
Mm.
they found red corn there. So red corn is even more special, but it's more difficult to get. And they brought corn back to humans, and finally they could like sustain themselves. So corn has always been like corn everywhere. I always tell like my students that I'm a walking Frito because of how because my genetics is embedded with how much I eat corn, and that's true. Like there's studies about this,
Oh,
but
that's very
I
sweet.
but I told and I use Frito because they understand it here because if not it would be like a you know
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
totopo.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
It's
what
the serpent imagery is really turning into an ant is really is fascinating to me because
Mm.
A, I love myths, I love mythology, I love folk tales, I love these stories that are sort of embedded in the DNA of like ancestral memory and
Mm.
how it attempts to explain how things are formed or created.
Mm.
Um, but there seems to be a lot of serpent imagery because I recall during our last conversation, you had mentioned, and I don't know if there's any relation, you had mentioned the Our Lady of Guadalupe, who, I'm
mm,
curious to hear about around the sort of
Mm.
indigenous non-binary. But am I correct in that that they have this sort of serpent form as well?
no, totally, you're totally right.
Mm.
And just um I think I have a great connection with this too because what happened with corn is this idea of monocultures. No, all the
Yeah.
corn started to be yellow,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
and when you grew it within like understandings of reciprocity and like what people here call the three sisters, you would get like corn of many colors. So it was always this return. And I saw how like this modernity, like structures of modernity and capitalism were the ones who affected the yellow corn and made it reproduce so much and kind of moved away from um, polycultures, forms of growth, and
Yeah.
remove all of the varieties of multicolored corn.
Mm.
But and that's the same thing that happened with La Virgen de Guadalupe, because La Virgen de Guadalupe was revered in a place called Tepeyac, and it was like a land-based place where people would see it as a temple, but it's just like land.
Mm.
And during that time, when like conquistadores, Spanish conquistadores came to Mexico, they were turning any spiritual place into a church. So it was this like
Of course.
completely, yeah,
Mm.
no, this complete, and I think
Mm.
I shared where I grew up. There's this humongous pyramid. It's not a pyramid, but people, colloquially said it's
Mm.
a pyramid. It's a temple.
Mm.
But there was this humongous temple, and on top you could see that's like this little pyramid, this little church,
Mm.
and it was this like big representation of places where I grew up because we had like 365 churches all around
Right.
my my town, which is like a whole. They're really proud of that. Um, they are. You could
That's
go
like
to
a
church every
church
day.
on like every block.
Yeah, it literally it is.
It's a lot.
So and in every church you would see La Virgen de Guadalupe, like all of them. Like
Huh.
it's for me growing up, La Virgen de Guadalupe in Mexico, it's a lot more um revered than like Jesus Christ,
Mm,
100%.
okay.
And there's this big devotion to her because of the I think the mestizo and indigenous relationship. So the story goes that when Spanish conquistadors came, like 100 years later, something like that, there was Juan Diego Cuau- Cuautlotzin. It was like assistant of one of the prayers of the time, who was like in their mission to convert folks to Christianity. So the story goes that Juan Diego went out to the same place where Coatlicotonatzin, the mother with a, a falda, how do you say falda? With a skirt of serpents. That's the translation.
Yeah.
Um, was revered, no? So you would, and it was the intention of our mother, and then Tonatzin is the skirt of serpents because it's the movement of mountains, no? So you could see
Mm,
the understanding of Mother Earth, for example.
mhm, mhm.
So because all the mountains become those the movement of serpents, and in that place, the story goes that La Virgen de Guadalupe appeared to Juan Diego, and in Nahua, no, the language of my grandma,
Mm.
spoke that from now on they had to, in this place, revere La Virgen de Guadalupe, and she showed herself 4 times, and at the end left this like um, inscription of herself where you could see the figure of La Virgen,
Mm.
and from that point on, people started to um, pay homage and go to do all the migrations to that place, and it just became this very powerful story where La Virgen also appeared in Spain before, so it was the
Mm.
same type of um, devotion and imagery that they imposed on her,
Hmm.
Mm.
and something that elders from my community have said, it's like it's a spiritual plagiarism. some
Hmm.
Mm.
some people would call it, it's a religious syncretism, but they would always go against that term because it wasn't a joint thing. As the church is, it was
Yeah.
completely imposed
Mhm.
and then plagiarized and used and manipulated. And they used a lot of our stories and a lot of our celebrations and the way that we cultivate corn, for example, because a lot of the things that our ceremonies were completely tied to the harvest and
Yeah.
cultivation of corn.
Mm.
And every time that you see certain specific dates of cultivation of corn within the calendar, there is a saint. It's a saint day.
Mm.
So I
Mm.
grew up with these ceremonies where we would pray for these saints and La Virgen de Guadalupe, but we would carry corn, you know,
Mm.
Mm.
multicolored corn and thing, and we would divide ourselves in that. But we would also, I love this one that we were like asking for, like, for the corn to grow more and had a lot of strength. And you would ask for rain, you would ask for, like, not pests. And the we would dress the corn in, like, whatever you wanted, so you could put like a little skirt or something. And there was this beautiful relationship with the corn, because you would tend the corn and I was like, corn, please don't die and give us food, and so we even though we were like, you know praying for them saints, allegedly, in whatever that date it was always one. And it always had like an indigenous name after San Juan Tlacuitlala, but it was always
Mm.
San Juan first.
Yes.
And that happened all around South America and Latin, the Caribbean.
Mm.
And so that's where, for me, I grew up, even though we were having these really religious things, it also was a more spiritual connection towards land and cultivation. And you would still ask for all these things to happen in the land. You would still pray for rain and be like, and I think that's the um something that they could never take away,
Yeah.
the connection
Mm.
that we had with land,
Yeah.
and how much of our sustainment was always in relation to corn.
Yeah.
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 So is a lot
There's
of the indigenous knowledge of your family, the
yeah.
people of Mexico, was that written somewhere? Because you've sustained a great deal of it. I mean,
Yeah.
when I think about what we've lost here in just Southern Africa, because our traditions have always been oral. And when
Hmm.
colonization came to my continent, they stamped out as much as they could of our architecture. Like they razed our cities to the ground, and anything they found that was still vaguely sort of present from that time, they destroyed. They made sure that it was turned to dust, basically. So there's very little of who we were that still remains. We have a few things like, I don't know if you guys know that gold rhino, um, from the kingdom in Zimbabwe. So we have a few things like that are left over. But for the most part, the written things and the things that stood in our memory are gone. But when I was in Mexico, what I remember very strongly is we visited one of the temples near Mexico City. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name. Um,
Hmm.
Mm.
but I remember um, walking near where there were homes around the temple, and that also had a name which I don't remember. I'm sorry again. And there were broken pieces of glass and pottery. And I tell you, it was like spirit was sitting right on my shoulder in that moment. I was covered in goosebumps.
Hmm.
And the power of having that sort of ancient sort of wisdom still there, still something you can touch and hold on to. Is that still
Mm.
is the written knowledge there? Can you reach out
Hmm.
for that and still celebrate it today? Because the way you speak about it, it's still so present. Whereas for us,
Yeah.
I feel a lot of things are so distant because we don't really
Mm.
know. Do you know what I mean? So,
Yeah,
what's your
yeah, yeah.
experience with that?
Mm.
So it's really interesting because we did have a lot of historical artifacts that could tell us a lot of, like, our history
Mm,
in terms of Mesoamerican history, and knowing all of those indigenous and at that time, Mesoamerican civilizations, they would call them, in our history classes. And that was always a big connection because where I'm from, it's actually the cultura Olmeca, which is like one of the mother cultures, and has like this humongous, colossal
Mm.
heads.
Mm.
That right now, an artist in Mexico just recreated a head and put a Tesla in the middle of it and dropped the head.
I saw
And
that.
did you see that?
It's
It's
incredible.
amazing. I
Yeah.
live it. Obviously queer.
Yeah.
Obviously.
um, so growing up with that, it was really interesting to have it so closely, and also have Nahua as the language in a lot of things.
Mm.
We that is a big syncretism in terms of a lot of the words that we spoke
Yeah.
were completely in indigenous in languages, and that also affected the way that kind of we understood. But as you go a little bit deeper into what happened, something that not a lot of people know in specifically in Tenochtitlan, which is Mexico City,
Mm.
there was this library as big as Alexandria, as the Library of Alexandria, and they did exactly the same. It was the first thing that they burnt down, and it
Mm.
was one of the biggest impacts into, so-called American archivals, and the amount of knowledge that was lost there, because many things were also pictograms,
Yeah.
and they had all of that archived,
Mm.
and it was just completely burned to the ground. So, but something that they couldn't do because they just didn't have the manpower to do that is erase all the temples,
Yeah.
because they were
Yeah.
humongous
Massive.
structures of,
Yes.
so they could only like pave over
Mm.
and put something on top, which is what they
The
do. If
churches.
you went to Mexico, the center of Mexico City, you could see that with Templo Mayor.
Yes.
There's a big like church there. But
Mm.
maybe where you went is Teotihuacan, which
Yes.
is this
Yes.
insanely big.
Massive.
There's houses, and they couldn't cover that because they couldn't even find it.
Yeah.
So a lot of the things, like where I'm from, Tajín and Veracruz, the pyramid was discovered until the temple was discovered until the 80s, because nobody could go like, and discovered in the Western sense for academic purposes. Please, like, let the
Right.
record show that we know that
Yes.
discovery is a complete
Yeah. Yeah.
colonizer
Of course.
term.
Yeah. Yeah.
So discover for them whiteys,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
not for the people already knew, and we're like, oh yeah, we go to play all the time there.
Yes.
And so the discovery was like the removal of all the nature that had grown
Yeah.
with the temple, that was
Yeah.
completely
Right.
covered with, and now it's a protected site that has to have that maintenance of
Yeah.
protecting it also from nature. If you could see that
Right.
relation, it's
Right.
interesting.
Mm.
Right.
So yeah, we still do have those connections. We lost so much, but there's always that, like, um and I think that's something that happened since the 50s with, los muralistas mexicanos, and coming from the revolution in the 20s,
Mm.
this idea of how do we reclaim the indigenous side. but
Mm.
but also, it's really controversial because there was a mestizaje agenda into making folks kind of all be the same, but
Mm.
really trying to neglect and invisibilize the oppression that indigenous folks who are living off the land are experiencing.
Mhm.
Right.
And although and that's what I could see with like my family,
Mm.
and then the other ones, how they would like take advantage. It would be like, when we appreciate indigenous knowledges and aesthetics, when it has a nationalist agenda,
Mm.
Right.
but not when it's to break the structures of the system.
Mm.
So
Right.
for touristic purposes, for things like
Yes.
that. And that's a very different story for what my family was experiencing, my like
Yeah.
my abuelitos were experiencing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Danielle, I'm curious. I'm as we're kind of running out of time, but I'm curious, in terms of like you've shared so much about your relationship with um, religion, with colonialism, with drag and queerness. I'm curious, what does spirituality mean to you now, and what has that journey been like for you in terms of spirituality, or how do you
That's a
think
great
about
question.
it?
Yeah, that's so good because I did grow up with very Catholic ideals, but I wouldn't think that they were like it passed through, a very different experience. For my mother's side, those Catholic ideals were more of a checklist, you know.
Mm,
You have
Mm.
to go and do your baptism. You have to do your primera comunión. You have to go to the
Mm.
church
Mhm.
classes, and it was like a checklist.
right.
They never went to church, but I had to. For I
Right.
don't. She was like, "Oh, are we going to church on Sunday?" No, you can go to your classes, but we won't go.
Ah,
Um, but you have to do it because you have to do your first communion, and
Wow, that's so
you
funny.
could already see like, okay, sure. And then when you're 18, they want to come to it's called confirmación, like confirming your, I don't
Yeah.
know,
Your
yeah.
faith.
And I was like, of course I will not do that. Like at that point, I was completely out of it. But for my grandma, it was really for my abuelita from my father's side, and my abuelita a little bit more, but my abuelita, Cristina, was completely devoted, like
Mm,
Mm.
completely devoted. And that's where I tell you that it was very different for me because with her, I had no option. Like you were going to do all of the little things. You were going to cook all day. We were going to go up the hill. We're going to put the food. We're going to, come back and do all the other things that are needed for the night ceremony. So there wasn't a choice. And now looking it back, I'm like, oh, I'm so like it was so cool to see from her side as well because quote unquote they were also like Christian Catholic,
yeah,
but they
mm,
had a whole different like understanding of how to do that worship. It wasn't in like this four structures, four walls that you had to
right.
go and see this like white dude suffering. It was more to and I don't want to, yeah, but that is completely my experience. I'm sorry
Yeah.
for other folks. But it was really because you would go to back home with my abuelita, and it was the same thing but completely different with, because there weren't those four walls. It was completely more in relation to what you cultivated and
Mm.
how you asked for um for nourishment.
right.
And I think for me now, in terms of spirituality, it's been so trying to reflect on how much I'm still embedded within certain, Catholic values of why I reject the term at times,
Mm,
because I still like it wasn't the best experience growing up. I went to a Catholic camp where it was just like very traumatizing what the
mm-hmm,
people were doing there in terms of your bringing who you were and your own traumas.
mm,
I think I told you the story of the ripping, of the in
mhm.
fifth grade. Um,
mm.
Sorry, you
but
can't stay on and
now
not tell us the story. Sorry, what happened
the
in
the
fifth grade?
Yeah, what happened?
oh, okay, I'll this story is like it's insane.
I love
So we
this
were in
story
fifth.
because you told it in the car, and I was like driving. Yeah, I
I
was.
don't
Yeah.
remember.
So I was in fifth grade, and we went to a Catholic camp.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Catholic camp, this person ended the camps always with a big reflecting idea, or had like a big like in your face experience.
Mm.
So the first one that she did was telling ourselves that we were walking into a church and nobody had told us anything, but we walk until where you saw Jesus Christ, and on the bottom it was you would see like your mother or father in a coffin. and you would be like, what would you tell them at that moment?
Yeah.
And so you would see like these 9, 10 year olds just like completely destroyed, like crying in the corner, like, Mom, I always wanted to tell you that I loved you. And that, and we're just like distraught. I remember going that day at night and everybody had their eyes like this, no? Because she was really good also at vividly creating the imagery of your
Mm.
parents' death.
That is traumatizing.
Oh my god.
Traumatizing, traumatizing. And then, so she gives a spiel about the importance of, God in terms of the connection to your parents, and when they, even if they die, you will still have God, no? But then the next day, we were so like having moments that we were talking about it during, night, and we started like to chat. So at the next day, we go into a session and she's completely mad because we didn't reflect in silence during the night. And she goes, and you know that Jesus is watching, and you know that Jesus is watching, right? And she grabs a poster that was there that says like Jesus love you and the face of this white Jesus, and starts ripping it apart and starts going like, this is what you do to Jesus. This is what you're doing to Jesus. Yeah. And then grabs all the pieces and throws them in front of us and leaves the room. Like, I kid you not, we were like, what, what is happening? And we were still in this camp like for 3 more days,
Oh my
And
lord.
this is like the director of the camp,
So
and
dramatic.
Oh my
we
god.
we just see the pieces, and then there was a table, and the table had like masking tape, that transparent one, like Durex. And we were like, I think she wants us to put it together. So we put Jesus together.
Oh
Oh my
no.
god.
And then she came and she was like, I'm so grateful that you put Jesus together, because this is what you always have to do in your lives. So we came back from the camp with broken Jesus, put it back together, and we put it in front of our classroom for the entire year for us to see. It
Wow.
was insane. I remember. So years later, somebody posted like a picture, in Facebook, and was like, "Oh, look at us in the classroom." And I saw the picture, and I saw the white Jesus broken, and I was like, "Dude, do you see that Jesus broken there?"
Yeah.
And it just created this humongous conversation of, all of us 20 years ago
Yeah.
talking about that day. It was just
Yo,
insane.
Oh my god. Oh
yo,
my god.
I know. So that relationship with, it's very
yeah,
with society and my own faith has been um, tested.
Yeah.
But now I do think like more in myself as this big connection to land. And there's this process that happens, and I had the opportunity to go back and do a lot of work with the part that I was telling you about, ancestral seeds.
Mm.
And I don't think there's anything as more spiritual as being able to grow your own food. And the
Hmm.
process that it takes, that connection that you have to have
Mm-hmm.
when you really understand this how you are part of it,
yeah,
and I
Yeah.
think it also like I started for later on I started doing also like shrooms. And something that happened always in that point, and I do see that as such a spiritual experience, because
Mm.
I have ancestors who were doing shrooms as well during that time,
mm,
Tonacatep,
Mm.
and we have like part of the little things that we have in archivals is like a very important energy creation that is revered for like being the protector of mushrooms.
Mm.
And um I never had experience in the sense of that spiritual connection with land. And it really was like this, because there was this point where I was, and it's really funny because I was following an ant,
Oh,
in this place. Yeah, and it's such a, now that
yeah.
this is the first time that I think about
Yeah.
it.
yeah.
Oh God, this is so fun. But it's true. I was in Oaxaca,
Mm,
and we were just having this like ceremony where we were guided by a shaman to do this like spiritual thing.
mm,
And we just were like now in like the land, like going down, and I saw this ant, and I followed it for hours. I like 2 hours, but I was like, you have your own world, because I was so embedded in seeing how the ant move. And
mm,
it just really brought that side of how, I finally, even though all that like imposition between Christian and Catholic within my own things, I could still see how I grew up with this beautiful connection with land, and how that has always nourished who I am. And I think returning to that side of me, being an educator who was focused in sustainability and eco justice, and bringing forms of cultivating differently, um, really brought that side of my own spirituality, I guess.
That's
mm,
beautiful. And I think it makes so much sense too that, I'm obsessed with fungi.
mm,
Um, it makes so much sense that through shrooms, because we're so genetically close in proximity to mushrooms and fungi, even more so than like plants, right? That we would, what I love about, something like shrooms is like it will equalize the scale, or it brings a scale that is like, whether it's like the scale of an ant to the scale of, the planet, it sort of,
mm,
it changes that, um,
mm,
how we understand that scale, and it like allows us to tap in quite, you know naturally, I think, to connect, um, the vastness, of all of those things. And so it's a
mm,
really beautiful way of very, very immediately ground. It's so like friendly too. It's very
Hmm.
warm. It's very understanding, um, and wants to understand us, and is wanting to like bring us to that place of empathy and understanding back to the land.
yes.
So yeah, I love that. Love that story. It's so beautiful. I love that you just spent 2 hours, like
Following that
chasing,
ant.
following, chasing the sand. It's great.
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Danielle. And actually, I just realized what a, I guess, ironic day to be having this conversation on Good Friday.
I
Oh
know.
yeah. Oh my
I was
god.
like, I was having a shower, and I was like, oh my God, we're doing it before the resurrection of it all.
Oh my god. That's so good.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Danielle. And thanks everyone for watching. Catch us on the next episode of Hot Pot Talks. See you later.
Bye.